This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Hello there. Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast. I am Stephen Mansfield, and this is the podcast where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. So glad you're with me. I want to get right to it by talking about something negative, and because I'm going to talk about something negative, I want to say the positive first. I am an optimist about history. I am an optimist about human beings. I am a guy who believes in a positive future, not on the strength of human beings alone, but because I believe there is a God and because I believe in the goodness of human beings and I believe there's a destiny and a purpose for mankind. And so even though I'm going to talk about something nearly apocalyptic in this podcast, I want you to have that up against the background that I am a guy who believes in our future. But there is something happening in our world. I've referred to it before, but the news recently is so dire that I want to make sure that those I'm influencing in governments around the world, that you in your personal life, even in your preparation for disaster in your family, that you are considering this. And let me start this way. Do you know what a dead pool is? What is a dead pool? This directly relates to what I want to talk about in this podcast. A dead pool is when a lake or a reservoir drops so low that water can no longer flow downstream past a dam by gravity. It's called a dead pool. It means the water is too low to spin the hydroelectric turbines in a dam. The dam holds water, but it makes no electricity. It's called a dead pool. The water is so low it can't flow by the power of gravity alone, the way that most rivers flow, and therefore can pool up in the dam or around the dam, but cannot cause the hydroelectric turbines to operate. Now, that's important. We tend to think of the flow of water being about people drinking water, but do we realize that the flow of water in the world also powers turbines and gives entire nations electricity? That's what a dead pool is, and I'm calling this podcast Dead Pool World, this particular episode, because I am deeply concerned about what is happening with water around the world. And don't get turned off because you live by a lake or an ocean. Hang on for a moment, because I want to talk to you about you and your family in relation to this theme. Now, let me start big and broad. I'll get very specific in a moment, but let me start big and broad with some United Nations statistics. Now, I know, I work in international affairs, and I'm aware that often UN statistics are the third world trying to get the first world to invest in the third world. I understand that there's a bit of a game going on there, and I do not mean to put down the third world. Those of you from third world nations, please know I speak only with respect. But often that is part of what's going on, and it's also part of why in the capitals of the West, UN statistics often are doubted and even ignored. Listen to this. Nearly 4 billion people, that's half the world, face severe water scarcity for at least 1 month a year. That's half the world face water scarcity for at least 1 month a year, and 2.2 billion lack safely managed drinking water all the time. That's a quarter of everybody on the planet. So a half of everybody on the planet faces water scarcity at least 30 days a year, and 2.2, or a quarter of all the people on the planet, don't have well-managed drinking water. Listen to this. 75% of humanity lives in countries classified as water insecure or critically water insecure. That's huge. 75%. Nearly 2/3 of the global population experiences severe water scarcity at least 1 month every year. Think about that. That's huge, according to the UN. Now, I want to say that because of global warming, there's controversy about whether global warming is man-made or not, but there cannot be controversy about the fact that the Earth is warming. It's in a warming phase. Yes, this has happened in history, and it's happening now. So whatever you think the cause is, that shouldn't mitigate against you understanding that it's happening in our time. Water that comes from melting snow caps, ice caps in mountains. Water that comes from precipitation. All of the sources of water are challenged in our time, and it's causing huge problems in the world. Let me talk about the United States for just a moment. Lake Mead, which is one of the important lakes in an entire water system in our world, is the lowest it's been in 90 years. Also, Lake Powell. These are man-made lakes. These power major dams. These provide water for up to as many as 40 million people. 40 million people. Now think about that. And yet, these lakes are so low, they are very close to being dead pools. In fact, one of these lakes, if it drops another 30 feet, will be a dead pool. It will not flow by power of gravity past dams, thus producing electricity and thus getting water to where it needs to go so that people can drink it. In the United States right now, 45 U.S. states are experiencing drought conditions. Think about that. 45 states are experiencing drought conditions. Water rationing it happens and is mandated at the local level. So we don't necessarily have federal statistics for this, but in states like Texas, Colorado, North Carolina, Arizona, and Florida, there are local rationing demands, local rationing orders given, and in 45 states, there are drought conditions. I want you to get an app to confirm this. Get the app Watch, W-A-T-C-H, Duty, D-U-T-Y. 2 words, Watch Duty. It's free. Get the app. You're going to see everywhere in the United States where there are wildfires. You won't believe it. You won't believe what this app will show you. These are officially reported wildfires around the United States. You just won't believe it. It will look like the country, or at least half of it, is on fire. A lot of this is due to the same droughts that are a result of low water and this facet of global warming. Now, I think some people have tried to manipulate global warming to restrict business and to create socialist policies and institute them and so on. So there have been some ill intents regarding this. But again, I want to say that should not keep us from looking at the facts. Even if global warming is completely a natural phenomenon and nothing man does affects it at all, let's just go with that argument for a moment. The fact is, it's still happening. So we are dealing with a dead pool world. I'm overstating to make a point. We are dealing with a time, a generation in which water, in its potable, power-inducing form, potable means drinkable, is dramatically reducing, and a huge portion of the world is in crisis. And we are going to see nations go to war over water. We are going to see conflicts between American states over water. But let's not just talk about the United States. Many of you know I spent about a third of my youth in Europe, growing up in Europe, love Europe, have a German daughter-in-law. I mention this every time just to tell you a little bit what my connection is, not that he gives me any credit. But the Danube River, which is the second longest river in Europe, is experiencing such record low water levels because of heat waves and droughts throughout Central and Eastern Europe. The water has dropped 9 inches of late, so low, in fact, that sandbars are being exposed, but that's not what I wanted to mention. They are actually finding World War II warships at the bottom of the Danube. They're beginning to be exposed. Sandbars are being exposed. The water is so close to these sandbars that the portions of the river and increasingly larger sections of the river are having to be shut down. And they're also finding unexploded ordnance. Can you believe it? They're actually finding explosives that have not been exploded in these warships and are sometimes around them. For example, a British air mine was found in Slovakia of late, discovered because the water is so low. So we are actually getting to a time where if the water continues to drop in the second longest river in Europe, it may become unnavigable. Now, my point is not to bring a lot of bad news. My point is to say, because a lot of lawmakers, a lot of governmental people listen to this podcast, I'm grateful for you. I want to say that we have a tendency to be distracted by the hot stuff in the news, but some of the biggest and most important trends don't get press. And I talk about this all the time. Absolutely, I want you focused on Iran and what's going on there, and I want you to force your government to do a better job with all that. Absolutely, we need to be paying attention to the rise of radical Islam. Absolutely. Many of these things that are in the news are important, but they can become shiny objects that keep us from focusing on things that are critically important and get no press at all. Water gets almost no press at all. The reason is that most of us are living by a flowing river, or we're living by the ocean, or we're living by a lake, or there's a lake an hour away, and we think, what's the problem? I turn the tap, water comes on. How could this be a problem? But we've got to pay attention to where it comes from, what the source is, and whether that source is drying up. In Colorado, in California, in that entire Colorado lake system, they are in crisis. And for the first time, we've actually had federally mandated rationing. Think about that. Federally mandated rationing. It usually happens at a local level. It's happening federally now. So we need to pay attention to this. This is, by the way, what I'm describing is in the United States. We Americans tend to be a little bit arrogant. We're not surprised that in Africa there are water problems. We're not surprised that in other countries there are water problems. But we suddenly, when it hits home, we're shocked and start blaming and not solving. But I want to suggest to you that in the next decades, water is going to become a major issue in the world. Now, there's plenty of water, don't misunderstand, but it's not drinkable, and it's in many cases, and it's not flowing where it needs to flow to power electricity. Remember, there's two basic things you have to deal with when it comes to water, maybe three, our farmers would tell us. Number one is drinking. Number two is hydroelectric power. And then, of course, number three is the watering, the irrigation of farms and of things that grow, for heaven's sake, crops. Well, all of this is being challenged now, and it's not just a matter of rainfall. It's a matter of the ability of rivers to flow. There's been global warming. There's less snow on the tops of mountains. Therefore, there's less snow to melt. Therefore, there's less water in the rivers. Therefore, there's less water in the lakes. Therefore, there's less water going through the dams, thus giving power, etc., etc., etc. Now, all of this is solvable. We have desalination technology, and we need to improve it. The Israelis are doing amazing jobs in their research with machines that pull water just from the thin air and are giving potable water to entire villages and towns in Africa. This is solvable, but we've got to focus on it. And one of the reasons this is a bit more of a crisis is that at least in the United States, we have a government that tends to be a bit anti-green energy. Now, I think we ought to be going for all of it. Let's go for everything. I don't think we ought to be focused on one solution. And yeah, a lot of this stuff does not measure up economically at the beginning. Yeah, I'm aware that windmills and I'm aware that solar it doesn't pay for itself right up front. But very few technologies ever did. That's why we needed investors. That's why we needed people willing to risk. That's why we needed people willing to give millions they wouldn't see for decades until decades later. But that's what we've got to be about. And in the United States, and I'll say specifically the Trump administration, you all know that I'm a moderate. Some of what he's doing is great. Some of what he's doing is ridiculous. It's just how it is. But the fact is that his administration tends to be anti-green energy. We need windmills. We need solar. We need these other machines that will produce drinking water just out of the thin air. I've told you before, I'm sure you laughed at me when I said it, but Bev and I had to have a dehumidifier in our home in D.C. for a while. We were pulling 6 to 8 gallons of water a day. This is just in a condo, by the way, that we have there because I have to be in D.C. a lot. We were pulling 6 to 8 gallons of water a day just out of thin air. This is doable. This is fixable. The big machines, the Israelis are pioneering. This can be done. I've told you before that I guest lectured at a Saudi university that was all about renewable energies. The Saudis are on it, man. Look up King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. They are on it because they realize the petroleum is running out, but they've got lots of sunshine, they've got lots of water, they got lots of wind, and they're harnessing those to power not only their nation, but power in the world. We're going to have to be big-minded and use our imaginations and use our creativity, and yet we're going to have to invest in these technologies. But water is a huge issue in our world. It's going to increasingly be so, and there are some very, very dangerous signs that the federal government has to get involved in regulating water use in certain regions of the country, that 45 of our 50 states are in drought condition, that we've got states actually in legal tension with each other over water rights, that dams can't produce electricity because water is not flowing through them, the dead pool condition that I've mentioned. This is serious. Now, I want you to download Watch Duty so you can see the situation about wildfires in America. I want you to pay attention to the issue of water. There are water institutes and organizations that monitor these things. Find your favorite online and monitor this. And here's a practical suggestion I have for every family. Every family should have a disaster plan. What's going to happen if the power goes out where you are? What's going to happen if you're snowbound? What's going to happen if you get caught in an ice storm? What's going to happen if the water gets cut off? Just this last year in Nashville in January, we were iced in without power for about 10 days in Nashville. Now, Nashville's a very advanced city and there's plenty of resources. Man, when the ice hit and the trees fell on the power lines, we were without power lines for 10 days. It was serious. How do you respond to something like that? How would you survive if water gets cut off in your area, if power gets cut off in your area, if the grocery stores close or you're not able to drive the roads? You got to think through a bit of a survival plan. And I don't mean living for 10 years out in the desert. I'm talking about just how you get through a crisis. And one of the things you want to have in your home, and this can be bought at your local camping supply company or store, is something that filters water to make it potable. This is something all campers have. This is something Special Forces uses. This is something that your military supply, local warehouse and distributor will have. This is something that all kinds of survivalist sites and all kinds of camping and hiking sites and so on online. These things are easily available. I'm not an expert in them, but there are things as simple as a kind of a sophisticated straw that you can stick in your toilet and have water to drink in an emergency. Believe in it. I used to travel in Russia before the water was pure enough for Westerners to drink without getting sick. Many, many Americans went over there and got sick because they drank the water from the tap. So I took a very sophisticated ceramic kind of pump that purified the water and never drank any water that wasn't purified and survived and did just fine. These things are available. They're not very expensive. Every home ought to have one. You ought to be able to drink from a muddy puddle in the back of your yard if you have to. I'm not trying to be weird and say these things are going to happen. You ought to be able to drink from the pond that's in your neighborhood for decoration. You ought to be able to drink from your swimming pool if you have one. But yeah, being able to survive short-term a water crisis is important. So get one of those things that allows you to filter almost any kind of water, even urine. I've known soldiers to talk about having to do it so that you can survive that. Now, that doesn't solve the big crisis, but it brings it home to your local survivability of a short-term crisis. On the global scale, we've got to pay attention to this. And those of you who are big investors and those of you who are into private equity, think about turning some of your resources in that direction. Not only is it good business, but it's going to serve mankind. I don't mean to be dark. I'm an optimist about the world, but I will tell you this. We're living in a dead pool world. Remember, a dead pool is water that's so low it doesn't flow through a dam, both for drinking and irrigation, but also to produce power. That is a society in crisis, and we need to solve it in our time.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.